This episode is brought to you by freedadcourse.com. You are always one conversation away from changing your life, and the power of hello is something that I subscribe to every single day, and I'm always saying hello to new people everywhere I go. Increasing your opportunity, increasing your connection, and getting access to the solutions to the problems that you are facing, whether you're on active duty or just beginning your veteran transition or even transitioning out for 20 years. On the other side of hello are the solutions that you're looking for. Again, head on over to freedadcourse.com. Get your 5-episode audio course to create more connection, create more friendships, and get back to living the life that you're trying to design.
But also go back to, I'd lost a lot of myself. And we were like, well, wait a second. We like each other again. Well, let's not fall into these same patterns. Is this eating ice cream? Is this just a little bit of ice cream as you described it? And we said, well, no, we need a better plan. We can't just eat ice cream all the time. And we can't just, we can't sit and say, now everything's okay and just coexist.
Dory 1, this is Fire Team Delta. Dad's coming home. Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Cloy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 59 of the Military Veteran Dad. And today is 1 week from the official day that I found out that I lost my job. And you might be thinking, why is Ben sound so cheery? He lost his job. Well, I can say in the last 7 days, I've gone through a high and low roller coaster of grieving and just letting go, because I did work there for 8 years. So there was a lot of connection, purpose, and it was just kind of a little bit of a security blanket. It was always there for 8 years. It was just something that I did. It was a constant. But now, like Thursday and Friday, I've really been feeling extremely free, and I am just ready to go on to the next pivot, as I'm calling about it. If you're friends with me on Facebook or LinkedIn, I've been blogging about it every day, and I feel my heart is more free. I feel my emotions are more free. So if you want to follow my journey of finding the next pivot, check me out on LinkedIn or on Facebook, because I'm sharing it there. I'm also doing a few on Instagram as well, at Ben_Cloy. But man, I feel so great. So stay tuned. I'm going to talk a little bit more, probably using the Friday solo to talk about my pivot and different things like that. But I am ready to step into the 2020 that I've talked about in the beginning, and honestly didn't really know what was going to happen when I talked about it in the beginning. But now this is going to be it. And today is February 3rd. And that means we are just 11 days away from Valentine's Day. And I didn't realize this, but it worked out perfect that we've had a theme of marriage podcast leading up to Valentine's Day, the most complicated, confusing holiday for men. You try your best, you put your best foot forward. 9 times out of 10, you probably missed it. And that's just, I think that's part of the holiday. I think that's part of the cliche, but that is what it is. But these episodes that we've been putting out on marriage between Daniel Faust, and we had the one with last week, this one with Lance Salazar is going to be even better. Maybe not better, but is going to be different. Different is a better word there, because this one actually goes into a story that is so real that you can't help but find similarities in your own life. Lance Salazar and Brandy Salazar, those names might be familiar because they recently wrote last year the book called Legendary Couples, Miracle Morning. Actually, the other way around, Miracle Morning for Legendary Couples. And Miracle Morning is a series written by Hal Elrod. And this series is essentially, probably there's like 15 different flavors of the Miracle Morning. And they had their story, and they used their story to create the Miracle Morning for Legendary Couples. And it's now what they do for their living. It's now what they tell their story. They use it as a platform to help other marriages come back together. And the story takes place in about 2015. But now in 2020, I've met Lance in person. I've heard him speak. I've heard the story. I've heard Brandy tell her side of the story on other podcasts. And it is just absolutely amazing. There'll be a link to that book in the show notes if you want to go ahead and check it out. And again, that's the Miracle Morning for Legendary Couples. And if you've read any of the Miracle Morning series, I highly recommend any of them. But this particular one is going to take the same idea of the savers and spending a certain amount of time in the morning. In this particular case, connecting with the one you love. So without further ado, let's get started with Lance Salazar, and then I will talk to you again on Friday. Welcome to the show, Lance.
Ben, thanks, dude. I'm honored to be here. I really appreciate you asking me to be on your show.
I appreciate you coming on the show. I was, as much as we become friends over the last year, I would say I was a little bit nervous. Nevertheless, asking you is you and Brandy are pretty up there in the fame category. I think anything you're connected to, Hal Elrod, you automatically put yourself into a league all of your own. And for people that don't know you, give us a little bit of background about your story and how you and your wife became the people that look to for coming back home to their marriage.
You know, that's funny. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible because I don't think that our story is that different from a lot of other people's stories.
Really, that's what you learn about when you're on the other side. I think that
yeah, it's so
there's
true,
more degrees, there's less degrees of separation between your issues and others, but no one's really willing to say them.
And sometimes I think there's other things that go on in relationships that lead to the demise of a relationship that we didn't experience. And I know I'm getting off track here rather than an introduction, but, you know, like Brandy and I never had any issues with, you know, infidelity, you know, so we don't often resonate sometimes with, you know, folks that have that going on in the relationship. But anyhow, I'm digressing, getting off track. But, you know, about 5 years ago, Brandy and I were like your typical couple that we just couldn't figure out how to necessarily get along. You know, we realized that there were these moments of our relationship being okay, you know, pretty decent. But then we found that 50%, maybe 70% of the time and more as it kept getting worse, that there was all this resentment and things building up that, you know, the relationship wasn't really good. And we came to this impasse where, you know, and it's interesting because we've had this question asked of us a few times where people will say, well, didn't you think about staying together for your daughters? And at the time they were, let me think about this, some subtracting, they were like 6 and 3, 6 years old and 3 years old. And we looked at each other and we said, is this what it's all cracked up to be? Is this what a good marriage looks like? Is this the relationship that we hope for our daughters to have when they get married? And from both of us, as much as it hurt us, and probably me more than Brandy, was no, this is not what we want for them. And they're watching us. They have a front row seat to how we interact with each other. They have a front row seat to us arguing. They have a front row seat to us just not spending time together. And that's the impression, the model that they're getting for what marriage looks like. And so Brandy and I decided that we were going to separate, that our children would have a better shot us with two people than they would with their mother and father together. And so Brandy and I decided to, you know, to separate, but we didn't completely put total divorce on the table just yet. What we both kind of realized too, was that we had some of our own cleanup to do, that we had each lost a bit of ourselves in our marriage, and that we wanted to truly get back to being people that we really liked being. And if you were to ask Brandy her side of the story, it's going to be a little bit different because her journey is quite a bit different than mine. My programming I was bringing to the marriage was different from the programming she was bringing to the marriage. But what I recognized, Ben, was in that moment that I didn't like who I was. I didn't like how I was showing up as a father. I didn't like how I was showing up as a husband. I didn't like how I was showing up as a man. And although I didn't go and see a doctor about it, I kind of self-diagnosed myself with depression. And I don't know if I was, you know, I didn't medicate or whatever else, but I certainly didn't like my life. I didn't like where I was. I didn't like where I was going. And at the time, I was not involved in any form of personal development. And, you know, Brandy was, especially with business. She was involved in personal development as it related to business. I was a working, you know, corporate pharmacist who had, you know, was W-2'd employee. She was a real estate investor and a real estate agent. And so she was out living more of an entrepreneur's life. And I think we couldn't quite see eye to eye with each other on where our lives were going. She was out there crushing it and doing all this, like I said, personal development related to growing her business. And we were living two separate lives in a lot of ways.
You didn't have a shared vision.
We did not. Oh, not for our family, not for our marriage. We had our own individual, well, she had her own individual vision. I can't even say I had one. I don't think I had a vision for myself, Ben. So I went down this path of like, well, what is personal growth? What is personal development? I just really started reading books. And one of the first things I really did is Brandy was involved in an organization that was bringing in Hal Elrod as a speaker. And in order to kind of understand what his message was, because a lot of the people in this organization, it was called One Life Fully Lived, didn't quite know who Hal Elrod really was, she started reading The Miracle Morning. And I'm like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to read this thing too. And I'm like, 6 things I could do in the morning. If anything, what that book and what that idea did was it gave me a sense of direction for a way I could, for a structure for the morning at least, so that I could do every single day. Can I do
A
this every
blueprint a
single
little
day?
bit.
Yeah, exactly. Like a roadmap, even if you want to call it that. And I started doing the savers every single day, all of them. And it was weird at first. I'm like, as a pharmacist, everything is very scientific and black and white, I guess you could say. And so this idea of meditation and visualization and affirmations and, exercise and reading, I could kind of wrap my mind around.
A little bit of woo-woo stuff in there.
Yeah, it was a little bit out there, right? And as a pharmacist too, I think everything needs to be explained for it to make sense. That if it's not in the scientific literature, then it's not true.
I'm sure you probably also suffered from if you couldn't take a pill to fix it, there's nothing wrong.
Right, exactly. So anyhow, I went down this path of, I would say honestly, and we put a side note, we put our marriage on the shelf is what Brandy and I call it. If you talk to us enough, you'll hear us use that term. We put our marriage on the shelf. What did that mean? It meant that we would live in the same house for a period of time. We gave ourselves 3 months before we would literally move out and, divorce. And we kind of kept the kids alive. We tried to be nice to each other, but we took everything related to intimacy, especially sex, off the table. It just wasn't anything we were like, no, there's too much pressure around it. It can sometimes be a Band-Aid where we found if we had sex and it was good, everything was okay, but then it wasn't. It was sort of like this false sense of our relationship being good.
It's like eating ice cream.
Right, exactly.
Makes you feel all nice and just amazing inside, but then it quickly fades away and you're left with the calories of your gut.
I think that's a really good way to look at it, Ben. And so, but what Brandy noticed was she liked the person I was starting to not become, but also go back to. I'd lost a lot of myself. And we were like, well, wait a second. We like each other again. Well, let's not fall into these same patterns. Is this eating ice cream? Is this just a little bit of ice cream as you described it? And we said, well, no, we need a better plan. We can't just eat ice cream all the time. And we can't just, we can't sit and say now everything's okay and just coexist. We decided we were going to do something radically different. And we decided we were going to take like business principles and health principles and say, what do we want this marriage to look like? What do we want to be doing in this marriage so that it can be, this vision? Like if you want to lose 50 pounds, for example, you can't just sit on the couch and will yourself to do that. You have to have a plan. I'm going to exercise this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to measure this. If that's not working, I'm going to pivot and do this. And we took those exact principles to our marriage. It sounds a little bit rigid, but man, it really brought a lot of clarity and direction, which is a huge thing I think a lot of couples miss, is the idea of direction in your relationship. That was missing before, and it changed everything. And we started just kind of sharing about this with friends because, like I said, I think there's a lot of, I'm probably answering your short question with a really long answer, but I think there's a lot of, at least at the time, a lot of taboo around couples saying that there's a problem. Like we'd be on Facebook and suddenly a couple is divorced and we didn't even know there was a problem.
I would say 2015, it was still like no one really had fully cracked the mirror that Facebook's not reality.
Right. And so we didn't want that either. We don't want people thinking that everything was shiny and perfect. And we just started sharing, as you know, Ben, we can't do this all alone. So we just started sharing and people started kind of secretly, but then it became a little more open to say, what did you do? What did you guys do? And we kind of looked at each other and, we're like, I don't know, what did we do? Let's map this all out. It's like, if we want to replicate for other people what, we did, we better come up with a structure. And that's what we did. And so that's how Legendary Couples was born. Legendary Couples with Kids was just us sharing our story, just telling people, we mess up. We still mess up. And we were on the brink of divorce, but we'll just share with you what we did and maybe it'll work for you. Maybe it won't. I don't know. but it works for us and it continues to work for us. And, and here we are today sharing that. And, going back to Hal really quick, we were doing savers, but we were starting to do them together, and we came up with our own mini routine. And, we shared that with Hal. We're like, just out of a whim, we're like, hey, this is what we kind of do on the side. Your savers even work, to do them as a couple. And he's like, that's brilliant. Will you write a book?
Talk about an asteroid hitting you right in the head. He's like,
yeah, we're like, okay.
How do you write a book?
So that's what we did. We got up at 4 a.m. every morning for a period of about 2 months, and out came the Miracle Morning for Couples.
So the one thing that guys suck at is expressing emotions and saying what they feel. What were some of the feelings that you were feeling in those first 30 days? Like even from internally, or even feelings that you started having for Brandy again?
I was scared. I want to say I was really scared, but truthfully, Ben, we'd been at those crossroads before. And I think I got to, in that moment, there was fear, but at the same time, there was a bigger realness to it than there was before. Because I think Brandy would just express her dissatisfaction in the marriage and be like, yeah, I'd change a few things here and everything would be okay for a moment. And then it wouldn't be. But in this moment, I was looking for apartments. I was looking for corporate housing. I was looking for, well, where am I going to go? How are we going to tell the kids? For the first time, that was what was going on in my mind. And I was a little bit scared. And I want to say, I was a little maybe embarrassed for what if the relationship didn't work out, what people would think. And I think that's what drives people not to reach out for help, to not really say much, let's say on Facebook or whatever else. They don't want, there's this thing around failure and embarrassment to a marriage that I think people are challenged with, especially, and I think it cripples them from seeking help. So what was I feeling? Those things. But at the same time, dude, I was also really fed up. I was just done with how I was leading my life. I wasn't living in integrity. I wasn't showing up, I wasn't growing up in my relationship, and I was just done. I was just, I'm like, and I really started getting my head around ideas, things like, if I'm the common denominator. If my marriage fails now and I don't change anything about myself, I'm going to carry the same programming and patterns into the next relationship. And so once again, my kids are going to get a view of another crappy relationship.
Yep.
So I had to change myself, and I completely let go, which is a hard thing to do. I think guys ask me this a lot. How do you let go of the outcome? How do you let go of caring about how your wife is going to react? And I want to say this, it's not letting go of caring about my wife. It's not letting go of any of those things, but it's not being attached to how she's going to react to it,
I've heard it recently described as almost like loving her through the storm. And I've really kind of equated it to like standing in the middle of a hurricane and you can't move an inch. And sometimes women bring you a blast of air that is so fierce, it's hurricane force. And you can't help but feel the rain ripping off your skin. But you have to be able to love through that wind and rawness of whatever your woman's bringing you, and continue to love without getting connected with what she's bringing you, because what she's bringing you is her love for you. And she's testing whether you're going to still be there on the other side of that.
Yeah, and I started really practicing this idea of separating myself from myself. Let me describe it this way. I would think about or look at myself in certain interactions as a third-party observer, and I would be like, dude, you're showing up like an idiot right now. And I'm not trying to be self-deprecating or what have you, but I would definitely look at it and say, are you acting in a way of somebody you'd want to be married to? Like, you think a woman would want to be married to that? And I'm like, no, something's got to be different. And so I really started stepping into the idea of being the husband I wanted to truly be, because I wasn't being that. So
that's a question right there that people often skip, that you can blame a lot on your wife. And there could be good reason to blame. But if you were to do an inventory of yourself, there is still a lot of shit on the table of yourself that you would automatically classify as a crappy husband without even evaluating the other party. And I think that's what you guys kind of started with first, is like that self-inventory of what my checklist sucks at right now, and making sure that that's checked before I come back to the relationship.
Totally. and Brandy had a different journey, but I think we kind of came to the same conclusion that neither one of us really liked the spouse we were being, and we both decided, well, who do we want to be? You know, uh, how do we want to show up? And my thought was around, if I show up the way I truly think I should show up as a husband, it's either going to attract Brandy back to me, or it's going to repel her and it'll attract somebody else. Because if I'm living my true, authentic, real self that I want to be, then that's going to attract the person, that right person for me, if that makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And truthfully, a lot of what I reacquired was my own confidence and mojo back. And so what it reminded Brandy of, without some of the arrogant pieces and the ego pieces that were probably there when we met when I was much younger, the things that she was attracted to in the first place. She's like, there's the Lance I remember. There are the good pieces of Lance that I really fell in love with, and it's back. And once she decided to stick with me and we wanted to create the marriage we wanted to, there was no going back to that person that was the husband not showing up again. I was not going to be that guy again.
Mm-hmm.
He creeps in every now and again, when it's not going to lie. I mean, some of those, confidence pieces kind of get at me, but I remember I have the self-awareness and then I have the tools in order to move through it more rapidly than I could before.
When Brandy started going on her own journey, what brought you back to her? Do you remember like a moment where you felt like that, like you felt the magnetic pull of coming back to her?
Yeah, one of the biggest things Brandy really did was she was really like, it's this business acumen that she has, this sort of like, I can create a plan, I can be on a team. A lot of it had to do with including me, if that makes sense, was this sort of sense of like, I like you again. I really, I like this new Lance, but let's be a team and let's move forward. And, there's definitely more of like this, if it makes any sense, there was more of this high-fiving coming out of her than
Mm-hmm.
there was, prior to. I think, her journey was much more like, I'm crushing it at work, but when I come home, my husband sucks, my kids are sucking, and I just want to go back to work. I want to go back to where people really, celebrate me. She didn't feel celebrated in the home. So I think a lot of it just came from the fact that she didn't want to give up. I would say she made the first moves toward wanting to stick it out than I did, because I was in a lot of ways just sort of like, okay, unattached, right? I had this sort of unattached, I'm going to be the husband I think I should be. And if she comes back, great. If not. And so it was more of an attraction than it was of her being attracted to me than it was for me I never lost attraction, I would say, for Brandy, if that makes sense. I thought she had some very masculine qualities. I think she started to sink into her feminine more, and she does that today. She really studies, feminine ideas. She's very driven, but at the same time, back then she was much more just hard edged. This is how it's going to be. Heavily driven. It's my way or the highway. And I think she started to let me lead. She started to let me, she was emasculating me before. And now she was allowing me to lead more, to be my more masculine, authentic self. And she was leaning into her feminine more as well.
You had mentioned that you were kind of closed off. And this is essentially, I think, every classic military man, because we're trained to keep our emotions on lockdown because they'll get us killed. What was your journey like opening up your heart?
Yeah. So while I'm not in the military, my father was a drill instructor in the Marine Corps.
Oh, perfect.
So yeah, right. And I think there was a lot of programming he gave me.
Now I know why I've always gotten along with you.
What's interesting about a guy who was a DI, he was down at MCRD in San Diego, down Balboa, and spent a lot of time at Pendleton when I was young. He never pushed me into going into the Marine Corps, which is interesting. He never once said, you should go into the military. I always found that so interesting from a guy that
actually makes Marines.
Yeah, I remember, this is a total side story, but I remember sitting on the toilet as a kid, everyone had magazines. Now we just have our phones and we get on the toilet and we get on our phones. And everyone had the basket of magazines, at the toilet back in the, late 70s, 80s. I'm at I was born in 73, so I'm 46. He had all like these Marine Corps magazines by the toilet with like guns and tanks, and it was, I forget what, at the Marine Corps Digest is what I think it was, to be honest with you. And I
Military
would just,
Times or Marine Corps Times?
no, I think it was called the Marine Corps Digest back then.
It
I
could have
don't
been
know.
back then.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm guessing this is somewhere like 1983, 84. I remember this most clearly. And so there was definitely this programming that he gave me around, militaristically living. And when things just don't work out, you just kind of move on. And I did get a little closed off sometimes. Additionally, just go back to my own program. My mom was killed in a car accident when I was 20. And I think I got this sort of sense of like, life is short, whatever, not to get too close to people because they just die. And
Yeah, why relive that pain again?
yeah. So
did your dad create a safe space for you to feel anything, or was it not safe to express something? Like, did he get upset if you were crying when you were maybe like 8?
No,
Like,
not really. I don't remember that from him. That doesn't mean he wasn't a loving father. He actually was, very supportive. He was very encouraging. He gave me a lot of great life lessons that I still reflect on today. But he definitely wasn't the nurturing, like my mother was. My mother was that. When she passed away, I definitely saw more of a side of my father that I hadn't seen before. It was weird to see him cry when my mom died. He cried. I can't say I actually ever saw him cry.
I've only seen my dad cry maybe once, and it was when my grandmother died.
Yeah. So, and then plus I was a pharmacist unconventionally in an ICU. So I would see people die all the time in my job. The one I met Brandy in, it was just like, oh, one of our patients died today, and put him in a body bag. It was just part of my job. And so I was definitely kind of walled off a lot. I would say from day one. Even my children used to say, Daddy, I've never seen you cry. Now they see me cry all the time. It's crazy. So
my daughter will often look back at me. What were we watching? We were watching a Disney movie. I can't think. Maybe it'll come to me. But they look back at me and like Lillian was like, Daddy, why are you crying? And I was like, damn, busted.
Yeah. No, and the ability to feel like that, I think, has been one of the greatest gifts that I've been given over the last few years, for my children to be able to see that, for them to know it's okay to do that. And truthfully, it draws Brandy and I closer. I think she actually really appreciates seeing me actually emote, if that makes some sense.
Yeah.
So
did you find that gift was there from your mom and dad and you suppressed it, or was that something you kind of had to tap in and self-create a little bit?
I think I had to self-create it, to be honest with you. I think there's a bit of my mom that helped me with that, but I don't know. And that's a good question, Ben. I'm not really sure. I'm not certain. I think Brandy brought a lot of it out of me. And honestly, dude, it's interesting. Helping people with their relationships has helped me. I actually, one of the first things I really wanted to do rather than help people with their marriages was to be a health coach. I actually have a certification in integrative nutrition. I have a health coaching certification I've never used because as a pharmacist, I really thought that I could do something different, in helping people with their health and and above and beyond. This was my own ego. I felt above and beyond what typical health coaches have because I have a doctorate degree in pharmacology, that I can sort of relate to that and have more of an expertise in coaching.
Both edges of the sword.
Right. But here's the crazy thing, dude. Sure, I could help somebody with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, all of these other things I've been trained to know how to treat, not just from a pharmacologic perspective, but from, diet, exercise, everything else, I can't feel that. I can't feel that because I don't know what it's like. But when a man comes to me and says, my marriage is not working, it's failing for a matter, I can feel into that. Because I would say that the near demise of my relationship was really the gift given to me to be able to have more empathy. I would say before that, I was actually probably quite an apathetic person. Some people would disagree. I've had people tell me, you're not completely closed off, that you were completely apathetic, but
you were probably just apathetic where there was fear based on what was going to come back from being vulnerable.
Right. Perhaps. Yeah. For some reasons, I just sometimes didn't care. But
it's almost like I wrote myself that early in life, people pushed me down so that later in life, I could pull people up. Like being bullied actually allowed me to be more empathetic because I can see it and feel it. you early in life, you fell down so that later in life you could pull people up.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to look at it.
And now you can feel that more as you reach out, and you can reach out and probably read it on their face even before they're willing to admit it.
Totally. And I think, a lot of this comes from our own experiences, right? We tend to gravitate or resonate with those people that know what we've been through or what we're going through, right? So.
And that's a message that resonates with a lot of military dads based on whether it be PTSD or the loss of a friend. They're all tragic. In some cases, your story could be as equally as bad as almost losing your marriage. But all of that can happen for you. And this is your dad had a kind of a pretty good armed gift if maybe he would have shifted a few extra degrees, because military dads are part of the 1% of the population that experience life in a way that no other dad does. And they can give a kid a perspective. And he sounds like he did give you some perspective that you still use today and run on, that if he would have showed up and then showed you what a father's love felt like and emotionally connected, he may have actually would have been able to even propel you further into the future, even stronger, and not have to wait for so long to fall down. And I think that's been my big message a lot of times is, as military dads, we're part of 1% of the population that no one else has experienced life the way we have. And we can create human beings that go out into the world and change it in a way that no one else has even thought of, based on what the amount of life we've lived in a short period of time.
Right. And one of the things I really learned from my dad, Ben, is that sometimes those lessons that they teach you don't actually get realized until much later, like you just kind of alluded to, right? When I think back on some of the things, maybe in the moment that didn't mean that much to me, my dad was planting seeds. And that's really a lot of what I want to do for my daughters too. Sometimes I go down, I talk about, personal growth, emotional intelligence is what I talk to my kids a lot about. And sometimes they look at me with blank faces or roll their eyes or they're like,
no,
whatever.
Not again.
Your
dad goes again.
And I just have to look at it from the perspective of how I look at some of the lessons my dad tried to teach me is planting seeds, right? If I don't plant those seeds, then nothing's going to bloom, or they get planted much later and then they bloom much later or what have you. I don't know. But I just look at them like I'm just planting seeds. They might not be listening to me right now, but they will later. And some of the biggest lessons my dad gave me were around discipline and integrity. My dad was very big on following through. Do what you say you're going to do. And I would say that I actually kind of repelled that and lacked that, especially early on in my marriage.
When you're in your rebellious phase?
Yeah, maybe my rebellious phase of being married. Initially, Brandy was always, even before we got married, had this challenge with me around following through. And then I started to really reflect, on the lessons that my father, gave me around integrity. It's like, if you say you're going to do something, you freaking do it, man.
Yeah, your word is your bond, and when your name is on something, that should mean something. And I've often liked to describe our military past or our military experience as like 1,000 wrench snap-on toolbox, that there are so many things that happen to us, especially even if it's like Iraq or Afghanistan or battle or war. There are wrenches in that box that is like working on a car that has one purpose for one spot, one nut. And you'll never know until you have to take that nut off. And you're like, oh, damn, that's what that nut was supposed to be. That wrench was there for. And that's kind of like when you use what happens in your life is just another wrench in that box for a moment in time. And then that wrench will get used. And you're like, damn, that wrench has been there for. My dad on the farm says the same thing. There's a pipe that he'll save since like 1978. Something will break and he'll pull it out of the scrapyard and been like, well, it's a good thing I held on to that for 30 years because now it just saved my ass.
Right.
When he got to weld something back together.
One of the things I've also learned about my dad too, is that he's actually, for, being a former drill instructor, he's quite thoughtful, but it's in a way that's very, I don't know, it doesn't come with a lot of words. It comes usually in very thoughtful gifts, really. Like what he does now is he doesn't really buy my daughters any gifts. He will write them letters about what I was like as a kid and send them pictures, old pictures, or one time I remember he came to visit us and we were walking down the street with the girls to go to the park. And I introduced him some neighbors that happened to be out. And I don't know how we got on the subject, but we were talking about games as a kid. And we talked about how we loved to play Stratego together when I was little. My dad used to always want to play Stratego with me. And I loved playing that with him. We bonded over chess and Stratego. And about a week later, he had sourced an old old Stratego board game from like the late 70s off of eBay and had it sent directly to me. It was all kind of dilapidated a little bit, but it had all the pieces and it was the exact version that I had as a kid with him. And it didn't say anything. There's nothing, no note, no nothing. It was just open it up and there was Stratego. And I knew exactly what he was talking about, that conversation we had with the neighbors. So
Is he still alive today?
he is. Yeah, he's still alive. He's actually quite young. He's 67. So
you got a lot more years, hopefully, to
to hang out,
random wisdom and see his daughters grow up and
exactly,
or his granddaughters grow up. I like kind of the sidetrack we took there, where we were reflecting on your dad, because, and you probably haven't used it a lot in your talks, but there's a lot of who you are. Those wrenches in your toolbox helped you get through what you went through. And I think that's what often is missed when you're in those heat of marriage problems, is you can feel like, is this a fork in the road or is this part of the path? And do I need to make a left turn and maybe end it? Or is this part of me growing and just continuing to use what life has happened for me and how it can propel me forward? And in a lot of ways, when you recommitted to go, you started really peeling back all the wrenches that you had given in your life and making sure that you were tuned up and operating correctly.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ben. And I think one of the things that's in what has changed for me too as well is I have huge analysis paralysis. So that when I come to that fork in the road, I'm trying to determine, am I going left? Am I going right? Is it a three-pronged fork? Am I going far right, middle right? And I'll sit there and I won't move forward or you didn't used to move forward because I wasn't sure which path to take. And what I've learned is that sometimes it's okay to just try one of the paths. I think we get caught up in the idea that if we make this huge mistake taking the wrong path, that we can't actually go back and try something different, that suddenly I've taken this
or
wrong
that it'll
path.
be a dead end, like life stops at some point.
It might be a dead end, and it's like, oh, well, that didn't work, so, and I think we get caught up in a lot of like, well, that was a waste of time or a waste of investment or what have you. And it's like, that's just learning. That's just part of the path. And I think sometimes the wrong path can be part of the path, that we can reevaluate, we can pivot, we can try something different, and cut our losses and say, well, that just didn't work. And Brandy and I do a lot of that in our marriage. We'll try. We used to call ourselves like relationship guinea pigs. We just got into this, like, well, let's try this. Let's see if this works. Well, that didn't work. Well, let's throw that out. Or we'd even keep it around and say, it might work for different couples. That might be something that, might work for them. But that just didn't work for us. So let's just try something different. And we've been okay with that. Been okay with just trying different things and being okay when things aren't working, to just then try something different that just might work. It's like the concept of throwing like 100 ideas at the wall and one will stick. If you're not even throwing the ideas at the wall, then nothing's going to stick. Or the Gretzky, if you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? Just do something, try it, give it a shot. Mm-hmm. And that's been a big change for me, is to not sit and stand in paralysis because I don't know which way to go.
What do you do when you need that jolt? I feel like your answer is going to be running, but I'm wondering what your answer would be.
You mean like when I need to get into
when you're when you're stuck and you need to decide to take action versus stand still.
It is running for me, to be honest with you. I've had some of my best ideas while running, in fact. And it could be anything for anybody. But what I do is I actually keep my phone with me. And when something sparks, I actually stop. I'll stop running and I'll be out of breath, but I'll leave a voice memo for myself. Because what I also learned, prior to that, was that so many times I'd get these great ideas and I'd be done with the run. I'm like, what was that idea again? What was that? And I wouldn't remember and I'd be irritated with myself. But yeah, for me, it's running. For some people I know, like, they like work, if they would like to work on cars, I think there's something in doing something you actually enjoy doing, to get
going back to
juices.
When you start finding yourself, then you start finding the mechanisms to figure out how to move forward. And when you reconnect with who you are and just get in that space where you can truly feel anything you need to feel, that's often where the most clarity comes from. Let's pivot to a different direction. So military spouses have to learn how to do life without their husband for months at a time. And it's they accept it, they sign on for it, but they have to learn how to live without their husband there. And then they have to figure out how to reintegrate to that process. When you, and that's kind of sounds like Brandy she was really able to do a lot without you. Like you probably didn't feel like you even really needed to be there. You might have probably maybe even felt in the way. And a lot of dads coming back home to their marriages would often feel the same way. When you think about trying to reconnect with someone that is in that masculine mode out of survival, which a military spouse is, what would you want a dad to listen to of like, what does that woman need to kind of switch out of it? Maybe they don't have any issues. Maybe they just naturally need to turn the flames up again. What's the ways that you've discovered in your...
Well, the best way I can probably equate this might be even from a relationship that where the spouses are together but a bit disconnected, is to just get to know each other again. You might think you really know each other, but there's a good chance that if, the husband's been away for a while, that he doesn't really know his wife as well as he, or she may
Life
have
kept
evolved.
going.
And she may have evolved and changed. And there's no shame in going back through the process of courting and dating again. Brandy and I found that after 10 years of marriage that we had evolved, and it was fun. Sidestepping, I get a few guys that'll be like, I feel disconnected from my wife. How can we have conversations around being more vulnerable? And I will say, don't do that right away. Don't jump from being disconnected into being, trying to be super vulnerable with each other and having these deep conversations about where the relationship is going. Keep it easy, keep it light. We would ask each other questions like, tell me about the most important, or not important, the most embarrassing moment, in your life as a kid. Or we'd go back through old stories. And it was weird that I found that there were some things she had never shared with me before and vice versa. So I don't know if that's exactly,
and there's a word that I don't know if I just created it, but I discovered it in my own head last month. I was talking to a Navy SEAL and it kind of hit me through what we were talking about, that really what you need is kind of an empathy bridge to rebuild and to be able to cross it on each other and meet each other in the middle on top of the bridge. But you're at both different parts of your life, especially because her life kept going. Your life, it went in a completely different direction because you were fighting a war, and you need to discover what life was like while you were gone. But you don't want to pull out the heavy stuff. You just really want curiosity. But by kind of doing that, you create that bridge to meet each other, and then you can start going forward again together.
Yeah, I do think there just needs to be a time and space for just connecting, being simple again, before it gets too heavy. Because I think that heaviness, especially when you've been apart for so long, it creates a lot of pressure. Mm-hmm. It creates a lot of, this artificial demand, if you want to call it that, where you're feeling as though you've got to make the puzzle pieces fit, and then you're discouraged when they don't right away. And if you just go through the path of just getting to know each other again and keeping simple conversations simple, to me, that becomes the practice for the deeper conversations, the more intimate conversations down the road.
It's a 10-pound barbell at the gym. You don't go right to the 80 pounds when you're trying to lift it.
You're right.
Like the ones, and if you keep doing the reps, the 10, you can go to the 20 and then the 30.
Yeah. And I think, with this comes the idea of patience. The things aren't going to turn around overnight. And you've probably seen this in the Alliance, buddy, is that, a lot of guys will be like, oh, well, I've been in the Alliance. I've been working in this dad's group for 2 weeks, and my wife isn't changing. She hasn't seen the benefit of it. I'm like, dude, you've got years of not being connected. You're not going to turn it around overnight. Be patient, stay the course. And all the little things add up after. It's a compound effect, I mean, some of the great things aren't realized, right away. Then they take all of these little deposits, as small as they might be, even just talking about whatever during folding laundry together.
You might like this analogy. I heard it recently in a podcast that brushing your teeth on a single day does absolutely nothing for the health of your teeth. But brushing your teeth daily over your life allows you a clean, healthy mouth. And another similar way to relate it to is sending your wife one text once a month does nothing each day. If you do it every day over time, that will compound and create a better relationship. There's a lot of events that absolutely mean nothing by themselves, but compounded like brushing your teeth can completely change how your teeth look over time.
Absolutely. You're totally right, and when, a lot of the things I did early on to make my marriage more strong were little simple habits of, I would put Brandy wanted to kiss more. She expressed that. And it was something I would not always think about in a moment, it was more of her thing. And I would leave reminders on my phone. Ping, kiss Brandy, ping, and I'd have to dismiss it once I did it, and I would do this, I think I did it 3 times a day, and all those things add up and actually become habitual. They don't have to track them anymore. There's no harm in, I think a lot of people are like, well, that's unromantic, that you have to remind yourself to kiss your wife. I'm like, sure, but I'm trying to build a new muscle.
Yeah, that's
you know?
2019. That's just taking advantage of technology to allow me to do it quicker, faster, and cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. And I even told her, I'm like, look, I'm setting these reminders to kiss you. It doesn't mean I don't want to. It's just that sometimes my head might be somewhere else, and this pulls me back into, recognizing what it is you desire in this relationship. And by golly, I desire it too. It just becomes, I had to make it more second nature by making it something I had to track at first. So,
yeah, I like that. And it's doing a lot of just the simple things, but also when you start doing those, that's when you start to create the polarity that starts attracting you back to each other, because then you start to feel something when that kiss, and then your brain starts liking it, like a dopamine. And so then you start getting your dopamine from your wife instead of Facebook or work or that email or that praise or that beer with your co-workers after work. You start to get what you really need. Your human needs get fulfilled in ways that fuel your life versus distracting and just pulling you and getting you from somewhere that's no different than eating a bowl of ice cream and then feeling guilty afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. But one of the big things that I know we haven't talked a ton about really is, and I know if we're talking about marriage here, a lot of guys are listening to this probably going, we're at a point where I can't even think about kissing my wife or whatever else. And again, it goes back to that, you got to work on you. And I know it gets cliched and thrown around so much, to work on yourself, but, working on yourself is working on your marriage. It is working on your fatherhood. It's that oxygen mask theory of, and I have those 3 guiding lights. When I started my personal development journey, because there might be guys listening to this that don't, read a lot or, personal growth books. And there are all these ideas that flooded in, but, and I know you've heard me talk about these, that the 3 that I still use them today is, I've got to also remember to create my own happiness, so that I only have control over myself. And this is a big one in parenting now for me is, my kids start to irritate me. Well, I'm irritated because I can't control them. And that attachment leads to suffering. It's that the idea of living your true authentic self, being who you want to be, aside from, ego, trying to let go of your ego, and can we curse on this show? Being an asshole. Don't be a dick, that when we step into that, that's when everything else will fall into place.
I've been really peeling back this. I've never heard it really said, but once I heard it, it made perfect sense that you can't approach your marriage unconditionally until you unconditionally love yourself.
Absolutely.
Like I can't tell how many times or how many years I spent trying to unconditionally bring love in my marriage. But I can tell you in a heartbeat, I never unconditionally loved myself or the person looking back in the mirror. And that has been my 2020 commitment, or my next decade and the rest of my life commitment, that until I look in the mirror every morning and can truly love physically the inside and outside of who I am, I still have work to do.
Yeah. It's one of the things I noticed as a side effect, you want to call it, or a byproduct of doing this work, was that I noticed that if I was in a really good mood and my wife wasn't, or my kids weren't, it wouldn't get me down. And it wasn't like I was trying. I'm like suddenly like, oh man, sucks that you guys aren't feeling good right now. I'll try to do what I can to help, raise your spirits and do what I can. But I noticed for a moment, I thought it was actually an apathy thing, but it really wasn't. It was more or less me just creating my own happiness, that their bad moods couldn't bring me down.
Yeah. You didn't need their happiness to fuel you weren't outsourcing your happiness to them.
Right, exactly. Because before I could be in a good mood and they could quickly bring me down because I was relying on their happiness too as well, or their joy or whatever else to feed back into me. When they do, that's fantastic, but I don't need it. I don't rely on it. I try to create those things for myself. Because like you just said, you have to truly love yourself before you can really give that love into other people. We've talked a lot of
Unconditionally, without expectation.
unconditionally, right? Without the expectation. It's the like David Dida's way of the superior man. The 3 stages of relationships. The first one being, and he has these terms for them that I forget, but the first one being, what can this relationship give me? And the second stage is the 50-50 tit for tat type of, I did this for you, you should be doing this for me. It's like, that doesn't really work either. And the third one being where you freely give without any expectation of them giving anything back to you. And from my perspective, to truly reach the third stage there where you can freely give is because you love yourself enough that you can freely pour into others without the need for them to pour back into you. It's hard to really do that if you don't truly love yourself.
Correct.
You
You're
truly
always just trying to rob Peter to pay Paul.
Right. You're becoming almost more of even maybe more of a people pleaser at the detriment of your own happiness by trying to give into them without giving anything back to yourself. And when you truly get to that point of self-love and caring about yourself, you can truly give into others without the need for them giving back. Typically what happens is that they do, but you don't need that. And that's it can be a difficult place to get to, but it's vital. It's absolutely vital.
Well, Lance, as we wrap up this interview, I am positive we rocked a few marriages and hopefully brought a few dads home to their kids and also their marriages. If you have one piece of parting advice to the military dads listening to this, and I do have almost 15% of listeners are women, so there's also maybe a little bit in there. But if you want to leave one piece of parting advice, what's your golden nugget for us?
One of the best things I've done through this journey is to really know myself, to truly study myself in a lot of ways. And like you called it, the peeling back of the onion and creating my own happiness. But then secondarily, there's also a piece of knowing your spouse. We didn't talk about this much on the call, but one of the greatest things I did too, as well, was to study my wife.
I've heard it said to get a PhD in your wife.
Yeah, get a PhD in your wife. Know what makes her tick. I started reading books and asking her questions and being super curious. And, because I started to really love myself, I wanted to pour into her in a way that felt good to her, right? I didn't want to just do the wrong things. I wanted hey, what lights you up now? What makes you tick? What do you love? And, even after, we've been married almost 15 years now, I still do that. I still study her and watch her and observe her, and knowing your wife is huge. Study her like your biggest hobby, whatever your greatest hobby is that you spend a ton of time on the internet studying. Do that for your wife,
and prioritize it. I've recently, I don't know how many episodes ago, but there's only one commitment that goes to your death, and that's the commitment to your spouse. Every other commitment is temporary. The commitment to your kids are going to leave the house, your career, everything else is temporary except the commitment to your spouse. And a large portion of marriages in the world, not just the United States, have that priority and that commitment not switched in the right priority.
Yeah. And I found that when I get down about other things, as long as my relationship with Brandy is rock solid, man, I can move through those negative feelings very easily, simply because I've invested into the study of Brandy. I've invested, I've prioritized that because, like you just said, that's the one commitment in my life that means more to me than any other, is the one that I've made to her.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I really appreciated this conversation, Lance, and I am definitely looking into get it out in the airwaves. And thank you for giving us your time this afternoon.
Dude, Ben, hey, thanks, buddy. I really appreciate being on the show. And like I said, I'm truly honored to be a part of it. And yeah, thank you.
That's a wrap. And thank you for listening to today's show, and I really hope you enjoyed it. The lifeblood of any new podcast are the reviews. If you haven't reviewed the podcast yet on iTunes, I would really appreciate it, and you will help us get the message out to even more military veteran dads. As John Maxwell says, if there is hope in the future, there is power in the present. Dads, it's time to come home.